Books of Enderal, the Butcher of Ark. Premise. They call me the Butcher. It hurts to write these words, though I am aware of their truth. What else should a man be called whose trail is marked by dozens of corpses? Corpses which are not mute witnesses of a battle or an accident? No. Corpses which are solely the result of my own doing. Men, women, elders, children, priests, merchants, travelers, and whores. My murders seem to follow an inscrutable pattern whose arbitrariness will put an icy veil around everyone's heart. But of course this will not be what heralds will proclaim. For them in the Holy Order I will be no less than a monstrosity, a pathless demon who has been led astray by his own mundane cravings. They will call me an evil man, a beast with a heart black as midnight, because these are the colors in which the world prefers to think, black and white. No one will ask about how and why. Even these pages will be hard to acquire, for the Holy Order will surely do everything in its power to prohibit their printing, which is why I shall congratulate you, whoever you may be, for holding them in your very own hands. With this assembly of withered pages you shall be given an insight into my very own thoughts. Do not understand them as a justification for my deeds, because that is not what they are. I assume full responsibility for what I have done, and I desire no absolution, neither from Malthus, whose supposed divinity is something I nowadays merely smile upon, nor from the people, from justice or some other strange greater power whose true nature we have not yet learned to comprehend. This book is no more than a testimony of strange and inscrutable happenings yonder, which have made me into what I am. Chapter 1. Follow the Fire. It was a dull, cold, and wet morning that would change my life forever. Yes, somehow it almost seemed as if the day Mother Nature, as a response for the festivities of the preceding night, had decided to recover herself with a dreamy, nondescript day. The reason for the aforementioned festivities had been the so-called Star Summer Night, which every year marks the beginning of a new spring, in which the night sky is illuminated by dozens of wild, untamed starfires. While the common people, however, use the occasion to indulge in their mundane cravings, whether by drinking in a smoky tavern, dancing around the first delve of spade, or having cultivated conversation on a masked ball. For us clerics it means no less than a night filled with processions, sermons, and prayer. After shortly attending the joyous speech of the mayor and giving my priestly blessing to the commencement of festivities, I silently retreated into the temple and prayed until both my knees and my tongue were sore, just like the holy verses oblige every priest to do. It was of no significance whether the cleric was the high priest in person, or, as it was the case with me, merely a simple, insignificant father in an even simpler and more insignificant village. Mine was called Fogville, and was situated on a constantly windy cliff at the very west of Enderal. It owed its name to the pale, thin wafts of mist which every morning laid themselves over the village countenance like a morning veil over the face of an old widow. I still remember the last gaze yonder, which I threw upon the poor houses at the bottom of the hill the village's temple was enthroned upon. After the dissonant orchestration of lute music, animated laughter, and popping of corks, almost an eerie silence had laid itself upon the village. Only here and there a lonesome figure would be seen and heard moving through the cool mist, and even the bakery's chimney remained still. I feebly smiled into the face of the village I had grown up in. My father, who actually wasn't my father, claimed to have found me wrapped in linen and lying in a basket near Wayshrine on the Mist Road. I had been abandoned, and the man who later became my father took me to the village, full of devotion and grateful for the divine gift. However, before his untimely death, only 10 years later, I never got rid of the feeling that his compassionate act was due to the fact that he found me right underneath a statue of Malthus, and not because of his wish for a child. Gilman the Tanner, as the villagers called him, was a delicate man with pockmarked skin and a slim nose. In his own opinion, the whole world conspired against him, which was the sole reason for his misery. He never talked much, but when he did, our conversations followed a general pattern. With his sawing voice he called me to his fireplace room, where he rigidly sat most of the time, along with 2 empty tankards of beer. Then he indicated to me to sit down and announced that he had to get something off his chest. The fact that only his foundling son was there to listen was another proof for how badly life treated him. It started right when I sat down. Hjalmar the hunter had sold him rancid oils, an evil cutthroat my father called him. But after all, it was in the nature of the Eterna, he said. And in Enderal this fact was not as well known as in Niram, or Matressa Zulja, who had served him bitter wine. A mean crone she was, he said. Oh, yes, but thanks to Malphus he had perceived her plan and cut her down to size. Then, of course, Rashik, the smith's twin boys. Rascals they were, both of them. No respect they had for path-abiding, hard-working people like him. But no manners were to be expected from a coalman in his breed. What do they know about decency, he said excitedly. These folks do nothing but shag until the bed breaks down. It did not matter to him that Rashik was a third-generation Kiranian living in Enderal, and that he preferred a long-term union with his mate over promiscuous family clans of his homeland. These conversations, his persistently sour breath, and the smell of raw hides, leather, and animal fats in the workshop make up a great deal of my childhood. Friends, I only had a few to none, mostly due to the fact that my father made me work hard in the tannery as soon as I reached the age of 5. If Mater Pylea, I'm sure of this now, had not by incident noticed my quick wit, I would still be there today, working between animal parts, stretched hides, and slippery grease. Maybe the strange experience at that misty morning would have never happened. Yet she noticed. And that is how it came on the day of my path consecration. The aged priest proclaimed my holy path in a solemn voice. I, Jael, Tanner's son, was predestined to entirely dedicate my life to Malphus's glory as a priest. Of course, back then I did not fully comprehend what they meant, but the other children's awestruck reactions make me realize it was a good thing. Thus I left the bleak tannery and only entered the old house at the end of the village to sleep there. For my foster father, the child abduction was only one more act of treason. Looking back, I think that the amiable Mater was the only real caregiver in my life. She had taught me to read and write, and she taught me the essentials of herbal lore. With empathy and toughness, she taught me what I needed to know to become part of the Enderalian clergy. 10 winters later, I received priesthood and began to serve in the small temple. I did what an obedient priest had to do. I held services, I prayed, I maintained the temple, and I heard the villagers' confessions. Mater Pylea left the village on her 60th name day and moved to a retirement quarter in the Sun Temple of the capital, which I only knew from tales. A year later, my father passed away, an event that, to my surprise, affected me deeply. Then everything became lethargic, routine until that very day. The man that I was then, was he a happy man? I'm not able to tell. When I try to recall the first 28 years of my life, my memories seem to be like fading words on an old parchment. My reason tells me that I was blessed in a way. The life of a priest was pleasant and constant, without highs and lows. I had enough to eat, I had a home and enough pennies to afford the services of wandering whore from time to time. I knew that according to the holy verses at the end of my days I would enter the eternal paths, my path trodden, my task fulfilled. But things turned out differently. After I had taken off my robes and warily laid down under the sheet of sheep's wool, I noticed a strange and dull feeling in my stomach. Today I know this unremarkable moment was the first time I encountered the fire. It was small, insignificant, only a weak glow. But it was there, knowing that I would wake up as a different man. However, on this gray morning I was too tired to pay attention to it. Exhausted, I wrapped my sheet around myself and was fast asleep a moment later. I woke in a dream. I found myself on an idyllic forest glade surrounded by green oak trees, whose leaves were moved gently by the wind. The setting sun stood at the horizon like molten blaze and threw a red light over the scenery. I savored the spicy, fresh air which tasted like wet moss, morning dew and old secrets, mysterious, wild, and clear, like life itself. In contrast to what we all know from nightly journeys that we call dreams, I was fully aware of the unreality of the scenery, so I accepted it as if it was as natural as time's passing. I was stark naked, as on the day of my birth, but I was not ashamed. On contrary, I felt strong, clear, and free. When I took my eyes away from the sky and looked in front of me, I saw her. She stood in an old ruin that was overgrown with ivy, and whose collapsed walls and arches told of ancient times. She wore a gray, flowing robe that only allowed a glimpse of her femininity beneath. Her hood hung deeply over her face so that only the tender and delicate parts of her cheeks and chin were visible, a sight that could have come from the imagination of a Kiranian painter. Her dense midnight black hair was tied into a snake-like braid and fell down to her shoulders. Various things were interwoven in her hair. Old, faded coins that must have been minted by lost civilizations, small, finely polished bones from animals unknown to us, and strange ribbons whose colorful threads created an artful pattern. But it was not all this that hypnotized me and drew me towards the veiled figure in the ruin. It was her smile. With every step I took towards her, I fell deeper into its charm. It was not a lovely smile, as some might assume. It was a mixture of melancholy, rage, hope, and love, a symphony of contradicting feelings which I thought to be irreconcilable. It was a smile that was able to speak great wisdom, as much as orders that would mean the death of thousands. A smile born from truths recognized in otherworldly existences. Cold sweat ran from my pores, and I felt how apprehensiveness mixed with peaceful bliss of the moment just gone. I came to a halt a few steps before her, still staring at her magical smile like a starving man at a feast. For a moment I believed to recognize a glimpse of mirth in her features, but it faded away as fast as it had appeared. Then she began to speak. "You are dying, Jael." Her voice was rough and tender at the same time, full of contrast. She spoke without mockery, pity, or cruelty. "Why?" I heard myself responding mechanically. "I am in the best of health." My answer was as pathetic and clumsy as it must appear to the reader of these yellowed pages, but I spoke them faster than I was able to think, without control. The woman nodded subtly, as if she had expected this very response. "You affirm that you are of good health." She paraphrased my words with a particular intonation. "But you fail to perceive the fabric of this world in all its intricacy." Slowly and regretfully she shook her head, like a magistra in the monastery school who got a foolish answer from a novice to a very simple question. Then she took her hands out of her robe's sleeves and indicated me to follow her. Even her walk had something of another world about it. Her body did not move with her steps, but it seemed to float. Silent and obedient, I followed her through the old ruin. Today, after I had gone through the vision in my thoughts many thousand times, I know that it was an old trading post. The walls and the rusty gate left no doubt about it. But in the vision I did not care about such banalities. To follow the figure in front of me was my sole purpose. She stopped in front of an old, overgrown tower, presumably once the heart of the ruin, and opened the cast-iron door which swung aside in an eerie, silent manner. "Go, Jael," she said. "Go and perceive the truth." These were the last words I heard until the horrid discovery inside the ruin, for when I was about to reply, she was gone. For the first time, a feeling of uncertainty mingled with the confidence that I had at the beginning of the vision. I was still aware of the fact that my physical body was lying on a bed in a modest chamber in another world. I also knew that I could decide to wake up from this wonderful and terrible vision, but I did not. Why? I am unable to say. Was it out of curiosity? Was it the sense of fate that covered the ruin like a thin, transcendent sleeve? I don't know. I entered. The floor felt cold under my naked feet, and the dusty air was only lit by a pale red sunbeam that made me cough as it filled my lungs. The inside was almost empty, except for spiderwebs, weathered furniture, and broken bones that had fallen from the crumbling walls. In the middle there was wooden construction, an extraordinarily large upright box. Hesitantly I walked closer. A word came to my head but faded from my mind as fast as it had appeared. I recognized how the fire of the setting sun extinguished and how it was replaced by a dull blue. Gentle, hazy fog started to cover the scenery, and everything that was peaceful and blessed before I entered the ruin was replaced by a sense of trepidation, creeping cold, wasting. My hand moved along the surface of the strange box that was slightly taller than me. The wood was decayed and gray, and an odd smell came from it, like iron. It was sweet and tempting, but at the same time repellent. "Leave," flashed through my head. "Leave before you inflame it." I was unable to determine if it was I who thought these thoughts. But of course I did not leave. Slowly my hand moved toward a gap at the side of the box that allowed me to open its lid. As the hinge opened with a reluctant mourning sound, I remembered the word that had slipped my mind. This time it did not vanish. It preserved in all its dreadfulness. The wooden construction in the middle of this abandoned ruin was no box. It was a coffin. Even today I can hardly find the right words for the terror that stared at me from the decomposing body inside the coffin. Without any doubt, the creature before my very eyes was myself. The brown hair thinning, even at the age of 28. The well-trimmed, dense beard that grew down to my chest. The beard that I grew to hide my unremarkable, long face. And there it was, my crooked nose, giving my face a vulture-like appearance, making me avoid my own reflection in the mirror. But the body in the coffin was dead, clenched like in the moment of dying, penned in like cattle. His head was pressed down to his shoulders. By the small dimensions of the coffin, his unnatural posture a silent accusation. His body was pinched, his arms pressed to himself in a twisted manner. Much more gruesome, though, was the face. The skin was pale and had a greenish-gray color like decayed tombstones. There were many deep fissures that were not bleeding, but decaying bare flesh and white bones. The beard was curly and wild, and maggots moved around the tangled mesh, oozing a festering, doughy liquid that was dripping down to the stone floor. The man's cheeks were hollow, and his lacerated lips were opened in a twisted way that gave the impression of a tormented smile. His teeth were rotten, and his tongue gray. But none of this was the reason for the blood-curdling, panic-fueled cry that escaped my throat. It was the eyes, or rather, it was the place where the eyes used to be on a healthy, living person. But there were no eyes. Weak and pale like shrouds, the lids, devoid of any sense, hung over gaping black sockets. Contradicting any logic, they seemed to stare at me, whispering, rotting and dead. The same festering liquid that came from the man's beard trickled down the brows and disappeared in the empty eye sockets. No words can describe the terror that filled me when I looked at that deformed creature. In panic, I hit the withered copy of myself, but I only loosened the body so it fell right towards me. I felt how the repellent, festering corpse water from the beard touched my lips, while a handful of maggots landed on my shoulder. For a short moment I was petrified. I held myself in my arms, like a twin, his own deceased brother. But this was no twin. When the maggots tried to move up my neck, I pushed the corpse away with a shrill cry, wiped away the maggots, and fled out of the ruin. Meanwhile it was night, and the moon stood cold, white, and unmoving in the sky. The veil of mist that formed inside the ruin faded as soon as I came outside and let myself fall to the ground, crying and breathing heavily. "I am dead," flashed through my mind. Again and again. Dead! Dead! I uttered a panicky scream, a pitiful effort to banish the madness from my mind. The terror remained. It was omnipresent, and I felt bitter tears making their way through my eyes. What by the righteous path does it mean? What kind of nightmare am I trapped in? Some might ask why I did not end the vision with the well-known physical stimulus by pinching myself, or even more so, because I was fully aware of the unreality of what was happening. The answer is I was unable to do it, and I knew it. What I went through was not one of the usual nightly phantasms that occasionally haunt us in the quiet hours. What I later began to understand was someone wanted to show me something, and I was unable to escape the truth, as little as a man can escape the sands of time. As I turned my gaze from the floor and started to crouch toward the stone arch in the forest, weeping helplessly, I saw her again, the veiled woman. She stood above me and stared down at me, almost with sympathy. At least I assumed so, because despite the angle of my view, I was unable to recognize anything above her cheeks but the unnatural shadow of her hood. "What are you?" I brought forth in a weak voice. "What by the black guardian's name are you, a demon? An angel of death?" It sounded pathetic, like the lament of a desperate child. "You ask me what I am," she answered again, an echo of my pitiful words. "And you assume I am a black angel of your God, come upon you to punish you. But A touch of maternal tenderness accompanied her rough voice. You ask the wrong question, Jael. For who I am is of no importance. For a moment I stared at her in confusion, unable to react to her enigmatic answer. I remained at the floor for a while, motionless, breathing frantically and panicking, looking at the veiled woman. After what felt like an eternity, I asked the question that needed to be asked. And what is the right question? For a brief moment I saw what seemed to be a sad smile caress her lips. You inquire from me what only you can answer, she said, and began to walk towards the stone arch. And I want to give you advice. She halted, looking like an unreal shape in the silver of the night. Advice on how you can avoid the death of your soul. There was a moment of silence. End your false life and follow the fire. Then the vision broke apart.